Hello, and welcome to another roundtable brought to you by Gestalt IT and Fortinet. Today, we're going to be talking about security at the edge of your network and how important it is to consider all of the facets of the ways that you secure the things that are important to you. I'd like to take just a moment for our guests to introduce themselves and give us a little background about who they are before we jump into the opening of today's roundtable, starting with Evan.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Evan Mincer. I currently work as an information security manager. I live out in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania region. I can be found on Twitter at Evan Mincer. And whenever I do get around to blogging, it's at itsecdef.com.
Michael Davis, currently working as a network architect. Background as a generalist in IT. Find me online at Michael_E Davis and at vbrainstorm.com.
All right, and our special guest today from Fortinet, Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Hey, Tom. My name is Jonathan Nguyen. I'm a field CISO here at Fortinet. You'll find me on LinkedIn and at fortinet.com. Thanks for having me here today.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. I think we're going to have a great discussion about a fun topic, at least for me. Security is always something that reaches a lot of what we do. So let's jump into today's discussion for this roundtable. We live in a world where edge computing is quickly becoming the new standard by which we do things. The power and capability of the devices that we're putting along the customer edge is way beyond anything we could have possibly imagined, even just 5 years ago. And we're starting to be very transformative with what we can accomplish with that. Things like AI and analysis and collecting additional data is helping the way that we can do predictive analysis, provide value to our customers, and even just create more reliable systems. But it's also increasing the attack surfaces that we have of these devices, because in the old days, when it was just a dumb box pushing packets back somewhere else, there wasn't a whole lot you could do to it. And today, boy, if you can get inside one of those things, the treasure trove of information that you can get your hands on, or worse yet, what you can do to manipulate it, is beyond capabilities that we would have even, would have been unable to dream of even just a couple of years ago. So we wanted to kind of talk about how important it is for end-to-end security in your network from the edge and beyond. Now, I'm going to start off with a question for Jonathan. Fortinet has always had a very interesting perspective on the edge because of some of the special solutions that you've developed. What's Fortinet's view of how important the edge is when it comes to securing devices?
Yeah, so so much has changed in the last 25 years. We talk about the edge. When I was growing up, the edge was an Irish guitar player from Dublin, right? So where we are is we look at computing as being a very distributed ecosystem today. And the data is being processed and stored on everything from the home office of one, the branch office, the retail location, the traditional enterprise edge, and now on the smart floors, on the edges of the enterprises themselves. So computing is very distributed. And what way we look at it is that you need protection on the LAN, WAN, data center, and cloud edges, because, as you said, that attack surface is so broad. You need to have a common overlay, if you will, across all these edges to ensure security.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people who believe that the edge is, a guitar player for U2 or a song from Aerosmith are the same kinds of people who believe, oh, well, the edge is just my customer premises equipment, or the edge is just the part of the cloud that faces me. They don't take into account every piece and how many cliffs there are that you could possibly fall off of.
That's right.
Yeah. Evan, you've done a lot of work with customers trying to, ramp up these kinds of technologies. What are some of the challenges that you've seen from a security perspective out in the real world?
Yeah, and actually being a customer really helps with that question. One of the biggest problems when you think, okay, way back to when I was growing up, you have a self-contained network and you have a firewall, and nothing's going to get past the firewall, and then someone goes to Starbucks, gets a virus, and walks right in. And nowadays, especially thanks to COVID, people are no longer in the office. So they're out in their homes. I know I have not been in the office in well over a year, and I don't think I have plans to go back. And we have a lot of people that are the same thing. When you look at where the data is no longer inside the data center. it's in the cloud, other data centers. So I'm paying Azure, AWS, or Google to host that data. So my biggest concern comes into the bad guys don't have to get into your office network anymore. They can just attack a laptop sitting at someone's house. And if we extend the edge out to the laptop, guess what? They're inside the network.
And I think that point cannot be understated enough, that we went from a world just 6 or 18 months ago where everything was in this perimeter, and we spent all of this time building up this fortress, essentially, that all of our data is going to be protected right up to this point, and nobody can storm those gates, and we're going to be fine. And then all of a sudden, yeah, we have to send you home for a year because we have to close our office. And now we went from having a couple of fortress locations to having hundreds, if not thousands, of lightly secured remote entry terminals in home networks. And this was not something that we were prepared for. I mean, I can remember hearing stories of people doing Herculean weekend turnups just to get the VPN concentrators up to snuff long enough for people to be able to dial in from home. And that didn't even take into account the fact, well, my kids are in the other room trying to watch Netflix and play video games. And what happens if their infected device gets a hold of my device? Can they ride my connection all the way into the office? And I think that we had started to address some of these concerns through technologies like SD-WAN and even SASE, which really started to pick up steam right around the time that the entire world shut down. And so I think that has to color the way that we do our network and security analysis going forward, simply because there is a real possibility for a lot of companies there will not be an office soon. There will not be this beautifully crafted perimeter technology, defense in depth, firewall, IDS, IPS. No, it's all somebody's box on their home office desk. And boy, we better hope that it's capable of protecting those people.
And that's one of the problems, is now you've got these distributed systems and you're having to manage them. Do they all talk back to your on-premises management systems, or do you go through a cloud service, or do you just kind of hope that once they connect to the VPN, they get a policy and it stays applied?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of shoulder shrugging and a lot of, well, I hope I know what's going on. But I think Jonathan actually has a really good answer from that. And it was something we were discussing when we were meeting about this. Jonathan, what's the Fortinet view on where that policy and that security implementation should start?
Yeah, so I think the hardest problem that we're facing today is this notion of cross-platform visibility and control. As we said, the computing is not only in the home, it's in the branch office, it's in the legacy private cloud and data center, but also in a lot of public clouds as well. So we think that a unified control process built in a platform that spans all of these distributed and disparate computing platforms is really the key. We call that adaptive cloud security. And it ensures that it's the same look and feel, whether it's a private cloud or data center, it's on your platform, on your infrastructure, on someone else's platform, someone else's infrastructure. You need to have that common visibility. I think the biggest source of angst for every security person is, what is the delta between what we think is actually happening in our networks and what actually is happening in our networks? And that's what we try to do at Fortinet to manage that level of complexity.
Yeah, there's the gap analysis is always going to be a challenge for people, simply because we think we know what it should look like, and we hope that it looks like that, but it can be so difficult to figure out if that's how it really appears to everyone. I mean, I can think of something as simple as like a tool that LinkedIn gives you. It's like, this is what your profile looks to other people when you add and update information. You're like, oh, well, I didn't think that I was showing that much. Those are tools that are really critical, because you need to understand how everything else looks and how secure it is. And honestly, in this day and age, how tempting of a target it might be for somebody who really wants to go after data that you might have somewhere.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the research, we just did a survey across 2021 cloud security trends, and 78% of the respondents said they really wanted a single pane of glass, a unified portal through which they can understand their current state and their desired state and what is in between that. I think one of the biggest challenges out there is we really don't understand what's in our environment. So there's research that suggests that 95% of all the problems in cloud computing are the customer's fault because of misconfigurations and the complexity of that shared responsibility model. So I think there's a very large need right now for an overlay platform that provides a unified visibility.
So I'm going to push back on you just a minute, Jonathan, because I really want to get an answer about how Fortinet views this whole idea. Single pane of glass is a term that gets thrown around a lot. I just want one place to go to look at all the things. But what really ends up happening in most organizations is we add another view, another tab into that dashboard. And so now it's not really a single pane of glass as much as it's a collection of glass panes. Stained glass would be a better way to put it. It might make a really pretty picture if you look at it just right. Yeah. How is Fortinet helping to unify those pieces together so that you get a holistic view of the security that you're dealing with instead of having to click back and forth between the cloud tab and the on-prem tab and the user tab and all those other things?
I've been, prior to Fortinet, I was in the MSS world for about 18 years or so. And I'll tell you, there's a big difference between a single pane of glass and a single glass of pain. And I've drank from that glass many, many times. And so the approach at Fortinet in its Fortinet security fabric is that it is an integrated platform, integrated at an OS level. So all of these devices in the security stack, the detection, prevention, response are all integrated, providing input into a single management console that gives you that visibility, whether you're looking at a data center, your private cloud, or a public cloud. Why? Because the same look and feel across these different disparate platforms. And we have that. So it shows you your current risk model, your posture, where you are with compliance, and where you are with your own definition of reasonable care. But even more importantly than that, we have the products within that capability to deliver a view into what the digital experience is, to understand how changes in networking, security, application performance ultimately affect things like business outcomes and customer experiences.
That makes sense. And yes, the glass of pain is something that a lot of people have had to deal with for many, many years. I think that's why single pane of glass is still such a catchy buzzword to stick on things, is because most people know we're not quite there yet. But it does sound like the Fortinet solution is a lot closer than many.
Yeah, and that's the real difference, right? If you're manually swivel chairing between management consoles, that's a lot of pain. But the fact that you've got devices and technologies integrated at an OS level, as well as integrations across 3,200 other products across 400 plus vendors, it really provides that level of integration and visibility, which really isn't out there right now.
One thing I want to touch on when we talk a little bit about edge devices, edge security, is this notion of SASE. For those of you who may not be 100% familiar with the term, we've had SD-WAN for several years. It has changed the way that we look at branches, whether they are remote office, branch office networks, or single user branches now. And SASE is a superset of what we see with SD-WAN. It stands for Secure Access Service Edge. It is an industry term coined by analysts that describes the way that we can secure SD-WAN. When most people start talking about edge security, they usually just throw their hands up and say SASE, almost like abracadabra, and then everything fixes itself. But there are challenges to the implementation of the technology, and there are limits to what it is capable of providing. Evan, I know that you've worked a lot with SD-WAN in the past, and you've kind of looked at the security implications of it. Is SASE the panacea that we are hearing about in the industry, or are there other things that people have to be aware of whenever they're trying to deploy secure SD-WAN connectivity?
Oh, there's definitely other things. I kind of see SASE as being an evolution. It used to be way back when you get T1s and E1s and connect through private lines, and then the private lines got more advanced. You get to MPLS. Well, now it's obviously a lot. It's a lot cheaper because internet's everywhere. So they went to SD-WAN, and now SASE adds on more functionality on top of SD-WAN. But I look at the concerns of what's actually happening in your environment. I think SASE adds on connectivity. It adds on some overview, but it's not the be all end all. What's happening on the endpoint. You look at like XDR type applications, looking at the endpoint applications. What's actually happening on the endpoint? Because as I was saying before, if the bad guy gets into a laptop, they're in the network. And that's a big concern.
Now, Michael, you work in an organization where you have a significant number of users of a variety of different trust levels in a way. Is SASE something that you can implement, or are there challenges to your specific vertical that make it extremely difficult where you need something a little bit more flexible?
Well, something that we're looking at as we're moving more towards cloud services and to unify our branch offices at a location outside of our perimeter rather than backhauling everything to us and sending it up to the cloud. But yeah, as far as securing endpoints, it's a huge challenge because we've got to be securing the data, but we also have to be friendly to research. And there's a balancing point there, especially when you get people doing research around security of infrastructure, because you want to make it secure, but you don't want to prevent them from doing their work. But you also have the issue of all these IoT devices, both industrial IoT and home IoT that get brought into the environment. So you've got to cordon those off as well, while still letting people use Alexa, Chromecast, etc. And it's a huge issue.
I can remember firing off some vulnerability team visits when I was playing around with Nmap for the first time. Those are not visits you want to get at your desk when people ask why you're trying to hack the network. I'm like, no, I'm legitimately trying to do research. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with this tool. Jonathan, we talk a little bit about the whole idea of SD-WAN and SASE, and luckily Fortinet has deep roots in both areas. I mean, they've been a security company as far back as even I can remember. And then when SD-WAN started picking up, you guys developed your own SD-WAN solution. And even before SASE became an industry term, a well-recognized term, you guys had already started to integrate your two expertise areas together. Talk a little bit about how Fortinet views the need for flexibility to secure SD-WAN traffic at the edge.
Yeah, so we've been working on convergence of security and networking since day one. And so we're the only vendor with a next generation firewall that has an organically developed and integrated SD-WAN capability on one platform. The way we look at SASE is that the constituent elements of zero trust, SD-WAN, firewall, secure web gateway, and CASB, cloud access security brokerage, those are all core components. And flexibility needs to be in consumption models, in form factors, and licensing models. What doesn't change is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The way we look at it at Fortinet is, we want to provide flexibility in the way you consume that. In some cases, it makes better sense to have an appliance on that edge if it's a retail office for something or a local branch office. In some other ways that it may be better to have it as a cloud delivered capability. We offer SASE as an appliance, as a VM, as a cloud delivered service, because today it's about outcomes and experiences, and it's about optimizing the networking, the security, as well as the compute, which is, as we've all said, all over the place, right? So yeah, we absolutely approach adaptability, flexibility, and optimizing those capabilities.
Yeah, I think that that's an important tale that we need to tell, because one of the other challenges that we run into is this idea that we're not actually sure where all of this stuff is happening. It used to be real easy. I drive to my office, I work in my office, all of my traffic stays in my office, and occasionally something needs to go out to the internet, like when I need to check my email. But today we live in a world with SD-WAN remote branch in my home. I have a multi-cloud setup where maybe sometimes I'm grabbing things from the data center, but other times I'm grabbing them from AWS. Sometimes something from Azure needs to go into my local data center. And all of that needs to be secure by design to prevent people from eavesdropping on it. So is multi-cloud, and by its very extension, a distributed workforce, really a driver for this need to create additional flexibility? Because I may not know where my edge is at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. That level of complexity, as Evan said, endpoint security is really about enterprise security. And so you need to understand, have behavioral-based detection and AI and all that good stuff around analytics across prevention, detection, and response from the endpoint all the way across to your public clouds. That's why Fortinet looks at security and protection on the LAN, WAN, data center, and cloud edges. And the hard part is, how do you have a common platform across all of that if you're not employing something like the fabric? And that's why we focus on developing that Fortinet security fabric.
Yeah, I think that that's super important. All right, so we talked a little bit about edge, and we've not just talked about guitarists or songs. We've talked about the importance of knowing where your edge is and how to best protect it, whether it's a user at the edge, a device at the edge, enterprise or IoT, or protecting the data as it flies across the network. But I want to ask this: as we move into a world where devices gain even more capabilities, where AI and ML workloads are being more and more executed at the edge to save money in the cloud because we're not having to run our cloud instances nearly as much, what potential pitfalls do you see as we move forward? Michael, what are you worried about as more and more things get done on the edge that you won't be able to protect your users from?
So largely it's whether or not the user can disable the protections, or if they download something, if it can automatically disable the protections, because they're not there in the office where you can just have someone swing by and quickly rectify the issue. You also have, if they're at home or at the coffee shop, you don't know what the security stance of the devices on the shared network is. So you've got to be able to partition the user data versus the company data, whether it's VMs or making sure that traffic going to this host or this IP takes a secure tunnel versus their Netflix traffic going just out to the internet at random. So being able to know what's on the device and isolate that data so we keep it secure.
Evan, what are some of the challenges that you anticipate seeing as edge becomes more pervasive?
I go back to the biggest problem in the network. The thing that is the most questionable is layer 8, the user itself, and what the user does. I've seen instances where, we're seeing this application on your iPad. What is it? Oh, that's just my son. Okay, why is your son using a company iPad? And then what else is happening on there? I know, I have 3 kids in this house, and I'm pretty sure one is gaming right now on the same network where I'm talking to you. So what is the bandwidth constraint that I have at home, and what is he doing? And there's also then the IoT devices, there's the Nests, the rings, that's on people's networks. What happens if something like that gets accessed? And a lot of times the user, they want that IoT device to work because it's their home. And what if they do something that allows that security to kind of falter for the business?
Now, Jonathan, I feel like these are very valid concerns. Users are creative people sometimes, and they're either going to get around security controls that they don't like, or they're going to introduce challenges at the edge that we may not be able to anticipate. Do you feel like that these are things that we're starting to see? Are there other things that we need to be taking into consideration? And how are some of the ways that Fortinet can help administrators kind of downplay the risks associated here?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's security awareness training for the users, layer 8, as Evan noted. Beyond that, endpoint protection that looks at behavioral-based detection, on-net traffic, off-net traffic. In addition to that, you need to be able to discern across those edges to see what's happening. So those zero trust principles we spoke to, and there's any number of ways that we can go about implementing zero trust principles of identify, authenticate, validate, log, and monitoring. And as we apply the combination of these technologies in an integrated way, you just have better visibility and control. But I think zero trust is foundational moving forward for security. I think SD-WAN is foundational for IT networking. So you see those elements of SASE as a baseline, if you will, going across the enterprise architecture.
Well, and another issue is, especially with people working remotely more, a lot of people are bandwidth constrained. They're not fortunate enough to have high-speed fiber to their houses. So the ease of being able to push huge definition updates out to them to secure them against known viruses are gone. You've got to be able to push the intelligence out as close to the device as possible so that it can take care of itself and just report upstream.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we realize is that all of this stuff all comes together. We don't live in a world anymore where a firewall fixes a problem. or a simple access policy will fix an issue. It all has to be pulled together. It all has to be consolidated into a single view that allows us to see the risk profile, and we need to have the ability to mitigate all of the challenges that we're going to face, because security is no longer a game of playing whack-a-mole to catch the problems we know about. It's putting ourselves into a position to minimize the things we don't know about while reacting quickly to prevent the things we do know about from opening us up to massive attacks, whether they are our users, our edge, or somewhere in the middle. All right. I want to thank our friends from Fortinet for being a part of this podcast roundtable and bringing it to you. Jonathan, if people want to learn a little bit more about some of the great solutions that Fortinet has put together to solve some of these challenges, where can they go to find that out?
Absolutely. You can search for the Fortinet Security Fabric, or just go to Fortinet.com and you'll see everything you need to know about distributed computing, digital transformation, and SASE and SD-WAN. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great. I want to thank our special guest, Jonathan from Fortinet. I also want to thank Evan and Michael for giving us their perspective on things. And thank you for listening to this roundtable. We enjoy bringing you interesting topics and debating some of the things that you will be hopefully able to adjust for and deal with in the future as you continue working in enterprise IT in a world filled with rapid digital transformation and growing reliance on the technology that practitioners like you work on a daily basis. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you more great content very soon.